What's up, everybody? Welcome to Gojo with Mike Golick Jr. That is me. With me, as always, a man whose future's so bright he needs to wear shades. Brandon Newman. Brandon, what's going on?
Nothing much, Mike. It's free agency time, so I'm feeling valuable.
Do you know a former NFL player that I worked out with actually said that to other people in person?
What?
My future's so bright I need to wear these sunglasses.
He wasn't being facetious?
No, DJ Swearinger, safety out of South Carolina, who ended up having a very substantial NFL career, once showed up to our combine prep at the Exos facility in Arizona with Gucci ski goggles on. And when one of the vets that was working out there asked him why he was wearing those, that was his answer. It is an incredible amount of self-confidence.
I mean, especially in that forum, surrounded by other people that are actually doing the thing already.
Oh, yeah.
Gucci ski goggles, though. I mean, that's kind of a bar. Like, Gucci would say that. I know it's not the same Gucci, but you know.
Also, weird tangent on that. A woman named Hope, who was an outstanding makeup artist at ESPN, who would work with us in the morning show a lot, had a son who was a up-and-coming rapper who went to Penn State, and his rap name was Gucci Ski Goggles.
Okay, Mike.
I'm like,
we got it.
I'm 99% sure I remember that right.
You guys start the podcast.
We got a great show for you guys today. As always, make sure you download, subscribe, rate, and review wherever you get your podcast. Leave us a 5-star rating and a review, and check us out on the DraftKings YouTube channel under the Mike Golick Jr. playlist. Nicole Auerbach, senior writer over at The Athletic, is going to stop by. Nicole covers a lot of college football, obviously, but also does a great job covering college basketball. She spent the last couple of days doing a lot of the Selection Sunday reaction shows on SiriusXM radio and is going to get us all set. We are going to go through a bunch of the bracket, try and help you fill out your bracket as smart as possible, look at the 1 seeds who have the toughest path, any teams that might have been misseeded, a couple of those middle-of-the-pack teams, some of the brand names you may know that have a good shot, and of course, Brandon's favorite, we identify some Cinderellas, including right off the bat, Nicole is going to give you one of the easiest players to root for in this tournament. You are going to have your party trick when you walk into wherever you're going to watch the games this weekend to be able to tell everybody about this one player that you're going to love to root for. So, Nicole's awesome, great stuff and great conversation with her. We touch on the women's bracket as well, including some of the biggest names there, South Carolina versus the field, Caitlin Clark being the surest bet and the, I think, biggest bang for your buck of any player in either tournament as far as household names. So plenty of great stuff to get to with her there. Also, a bit of housekeeping on that front, Brandon. We have got our March Madness bracket challenge that the listener, can do along with us here. It is on the NCAA March Madness bracket challenge app. So it's Live in the App Store. It's the NCAA one with the little logo on it there. When you look at that, it's the NCAA's bracket one. Our group is the Gojo podcast group. There's already 30 of you in there with us, or I guess 28 plus me and Brandon as of the time that we're recording this podcast. At Gojo Show on Twitter is where we tweeted out the link. So we'll make sure and I think probably go pin that to the profile for a little while so it's easy for everyone to find this. But we'll figure out if we can do a prize thing. I know there's sometimes some legalities around that, but if we can give you something for winning and beating us, then we will. If not, we'll just shout out the people who are highest up on the leaderboard as we go along and give you the credit for making us look like dumbasses, while Brandon and I play to find out which one of us is going to have to redo Pro Day back at Notre Dame if we lose our head-to-head bracket challenge.
Speaking of leaderboards, Mike, this isn't a contest of who has the best screen name, but Mountain Drew and Meatballs are my two favorite right now. If I'm just judging the people that we're playing with by their names alone.
Mountain Drew is exceptional creativity. So bonus points if you want to get your name shouted out on the podcast, make it a winner. Lord knows I'm sure Brandon will be trying for that with something incredibly way too horny. So at Gojo Show on Twitter is where you can find that. Brandon, now that we've got the podcast business out of the way,
yes,
it's time for one of the most wonderful times of the year. NFL's free agency has begun. We are in the legal tampering period, which makes no sense as we see all these deals announced, even though they are not yet signed. The notion of legal tampering is an oxymoron. All those things, I get it. This is an awesome time because young people are making life-changing sums of money. Like, I have been listening to that Bia song, Whole Lot of Money, on repeat all day because there are a few things cooler. The draft is awesome for that reason, too. Like, don't get me wrong. Those guys are making big-time money, accomplishing a life dream, but the second contract's the goal for all these guys.
Yeah, I was going to say there's something about the draft that they're still unproven. And it can end up being a really sad story if they're placed in the wrong spot, have bad injury, X, Y, and Z, versus like someone went out there, put their stuff on tape, and now a team is a bit more for them.
Well, and you know what? The draft is your reward for what you did in college. You're like less unproven. Right. It's, hey, you did this at this level, and now we think we can project you here. But that second contract is the one that provides a different level post 2011 when they changed it to that rookie pay scale because they were tired of Matthew Stafford and Cam Newton and all those guys getting more money than veterans. Now that second contract is the signifier of not only am I set for life financially, but I've also gone out and shown this level, the highest level of football the world has to offer, that I am one of the best players on the planet. Ooh. And it's got to be a unique satisfaction. It's cool for us as we've watched our friends go through that. You know, Kyle Rudolph, Harrison Smith, Zach Martin, some guys that we'll talk about today as well, friends and former teammates, former Notre Dame Fighting Irish guys that are a part of this. But just on a base level, it's one of my favorite days for that reason. It's also one of my favorite days because we get to wildly overreact to stuff very early on. I understand. I've heard people say it for years that you're not going to be able to judge these contracts until down the road and until we see these guys on the field. But that's not going to stop us from doing what every sports talk radio show in America is going to do today. And that's give out some winners and losers for the first day of NFL free agency, Brandon. And no better place to start where we ask the question, winner or loser, the New York Jets. Brandon, these people have to be in hell. We went into today with Aaron Rodgers being the number one line item on everybody's mind, wondering, now, not technically a free agent, but what the hell was going to happen with a player in Aaron Rodgers who said and stated this way back when, that he was not going to drag out this process and inconvenience not only the Green Bay Packers, but also whatever team he may be signing up with, whatever teams had lined up for his services. And instead, we've got a day where I've seen Stu Gatz religiously thirst tweeting at Aaron Rodgers, telling him to take his time. I've seen him tell Aaron Rodgers he loves him on Twitter more than Stu Gatz has told me he's loved me the entire time he knows me. It's getting awkward. So the Jets taking a big L on day one.
It's not a big L, Mike. I think although Aaron Rodgers said that he was going to make this decision quickly, we all knew it was going to be a little bit of a siesta before. He needed this day of news to run amok before he's actually ready to make his decision. I do think it's going to be soon because he doesn't want to be another Brett Favre. He doesn't want to do what Brett Favre did to him to Jordan Love. I don't think he does.
Brandon, much like the band Lone Star once said, he's already there. Take a look around. Yeah. He's the Favre in your team, and that's just how it's going down. And Brandon, part of this that got even worse for the Jets, because I'm with you. Overall, I do think Aaron Rodgers is going to sign there. I think there's been fire burning for a long time on this, around all the smoke. But I also think Aaron Rodgers appreciates content and understands that maybe dropping this on Tuesday after we've gotten through this initial wave might be a way to stand out a little bit more because, again, he's very aware of all this stuff. But the reason it sucks the most for Jets fans is because our guy, Trey Wingo, decided to go out there and get back into the news-breaking business. He had tweeted about this Rodgers stuff earlier, but yesterday, in the middle of the day, around 3 o'clock Eastern, Trey tweeted, quote, "Hearing Rodgers to the Jets is done. History about to repeat itself between New York and Green Bay. Time is indeed a flat circle." Love that. Shoot your shot, Trey. Problem is, after that, we had a whole lot of day where none of the rest of the NFL insiders were willing to go out here and actually verify this. Adam Schefter looked apoplectic on the NFL Live free agency show. Ian Rappaport wouldn't confirm it. We heard them saying, yes, people are optimistic. People think they're close, yada, yada, yada. But pen hasn't hit paper and nothing has actually happened yet on any of these moves. And so I think getting that little bit of a tease in the middle of the day was just enough to really put Jets fans over the line. Hell, even Garrett Wilson, wide receiver for the Jets, part of the group that would be openly thirsting for Aaron Rodgers, took to Twitter, said, now I can enjoy my vacation, was out here tweeting before just later last night saying, I ain't going to fake it. I thought that Dove Bro tweet was the news break I was waiting for. SMH, I don't know anything. Sorry about that. Garrett Wilson's all of us, man. Even he's caught up in it, and he's in the middle of it.
Yeah, no one knows anything, but everyone knows the same thing because that's the truth, right? Like these things don't leak and not come to fruition, especially when it comes to Aaron Rodgers and his future.
So I do love the idea, though, because I'm with you. I agree. I think the Jets are going to get this done. I wouldn't be surprised if, as you're listening to this podcast on Tuesday, it's already dated. That being said, I love the idea that this could be the version of what we got, the inverse of what happened with Tom Brady last year, where Tom Brady was all set to retire, and then you get the news breaking from the folks over at ESPN that Aaron Rodgers is retiring, and then you get him rage unquitting and coming back. In a lot of people's mind, the thought process was to spite the idea that Tom Brady was robbed of the ability to break his own news by Jeff Darlington and Adam Schefter. And so I love the thought that Aaron Rodgers may have been all set to go and join the Jets, and then he saw Trey tweet this, and now he is going to rage quit, retire, and leave the Jets holding the bag.
Even worse, Mike. He's going to rage, unsign from the Jets, go with the Raiders, make them have to sit Jimmy Garoppolo. This is the level of debauchery that Aaron Rodgers has. Like he is actually a Jedi, and he can make anything he wants to happen. It's like when Eli demanded to get traded after he got drafted. It's like, you're not supposed to be able to do that, but he's a Manning.
Perfect segue, by the way, into the next leg of winners and losers right here. The Raiders. I actually think this is a win. Now, the Raiders did sign Jimmy Garoppolo, the former 49ers quarterback, to a 3-year, $67.5 million deal with $34 million guaranteed. So, as we've talked about with a bunch of the other quarterback deals, not a ton of money, right? When you look at the life of this deal, $67.5 million divided by 3, some quick math, $22.5 million a year. And that 34 guaranteed over 3 years, really the number to pay attention to. This is a bridge to where they're going. And I think that's the reason that I feel like this is a win, because I look at this as the Raiders understanding they've got a ways to go and at least having a plan. Like I saw Tashawn Reed, who covers the Raiders for The Athletic, reposted a piece that he did with Dave Ziegler, the GM for the Las Vegas Raiders, and it was back at the Senior Bowl, and he talked about how they wanted this team to be homegrown. They want to look back in 4 years and say the draft picks that they made in this upcoming draft were the start of what they were getting ready to do now. And so if they believe that, they're a little bit of ways away from actually having the groundwork laid of what can be a successful franchise. I can walk with the thought process of not wanting to mess up your timeline by going all in on a quarterback right now that would need you to win in the immediacy. Like, I still think you could make an argument for Lamar Jackson and at least asking what that might cost, because if you're planning to build for the draft, that's what you've got to do when you sign a quarterback to a long-term deal. And with Lamar as opposed to Aaron Rodgers, you've got a longer runway. Lamar is 26 years old. That is someone you can, in theory, grow with while you add some pieces. You've already got weapons around him on offense. You try and start to build a little more around defense. Doing that and then saying we also want to be a homegrown team that builds through the draft are things that go together. We talk about that all the time. That's your job as a GM once you sign a high-profile quarterback.
Yes, Mike, but maybe I'm a romantic, but I have to think it's a little deeper than that.
Oh, no.
Like I think Jimmy G, I guess I've been a Jimmy G apologist for a long time, but I think it's a little bit deeper than him just being a bridge quarterback. Mike, Josh McDaniels has an opportunity to work with a quarterback that he almost had an opportunity to a long time ago at the Patriots. Am I wrong?
Well, I mean, they did work together. Now, he wasn't the starter at that point, but they did work together in that quarterback room. So he knows them. There's familiarity. Yes, that's absolutely a part of this also.
Like, I imagine he was a part of the decision to draft him. So, yes, I think there's a little bit of like there's a lot of people that end up with their high school sweetheart after getting married to the first person or the second person, and it's like, oh, it should have been you the whole time. Like, there's a chance of magic happening here in Vegas.
I don't think so. Like, I think Jimmy will go out and be what he's always been, which is fine. Like, fine. And if the roster around him is very good, then they'll do well. But Jimmy Garoppolo's not going to will this team to a place it wasn't already going. I do like the idea of Jimmy G playing the guy that you knew in your hometown who glowed up and got really hot. And now when you go back reeling off your divorce, he's sitting there waiting. I think there was a Ryan Reynolds role where he did something like this, where he was fat in high school and then hot when they came back. That's Jimmy, except he was hot when they were in New England too. So it doesn't hold up technically, but spiritually it's there.
Yes, he also looks like a Hallmark movie, like, suitor, or like the one that, you see him at the mall getting a Christmas tree. I know that doesn't match up, but like he looks like a Hallmark character. He looks like the Hallmark character that the girl is with and then ultimately leaves for the guy that she actually loves for all the right reasons, not just like Jimmy is the good looking one. He is a very nice guy. Like, he's not a Hallmark villain, not at all. Jimmy does not have that in him. He's the ultimate locker room guy, but he's also not special. Like, he's also not the one like the Taylor Swift song, screaming, crying, and kissing in the rain. That's not who Jimmy is. Jimmy's a very good quarterback. Jimmy is a winner in the setting that we saw him in, but this is not San Francisco. This is not what he just left as far as the infrastructure around him. And so again, you've got a guy that's going to go out there, be a great leader in your locker room, was loved by the guys that he was around in San Francisco, has winning in his past, can help be a culture guy, all that stuff that coaches love to preach, while also knowing that financially you're not committed over, too far, and he can maybe get you to where you want to go once you build up this foundation around him. Do you not realize why you're hating on him?
Why?
He doesn't have a beard.
He does have a beard.
You're like, he doesn't have a beard.
Jimmy Garoppolo has a beard.
Jimmy Garoppolo does not rock a beard. Have you seen him in the Subway commercial?
Jimmy Garoppolo absolutely wears facial hair. Often.
Okay. Look. Now we're gonna like furiously try to. He doesn't have a full enough beard, and I feel like that's why you don't respect him.
No, it has nothing to do with that.
Him the guy who gets cheated on in the Hallmark movies.
I didn't say cheated on. Don't you dare put that on me. He doesn't get cheated on. The woman has a moment of realization where she understands that the right guy's been there for her all along, and their problems are worth working through. Because damn it, she wants the rest of her life to start today.
Tell me you don't have that guy casted as a bearded Nick Offerman.
No, I'd probably go Glenn Powell. Again, all the point of those rom-coms is they're also very handsome, and it doesn't necessarily fit, but you can make Glenn's background a little dorkier. I think he can play a little nerdier.
Let's get back to the gridiron. Oh my gosh, I love that. I'm gonna get that on a shirt. No, no, I'm saying this. We should be happy for Jimmy Garoppolo. Like, this is a good. I'm not saying I'm not happy for him. See, you just have to slurp him up so much anytime someone remotely reminds you that he's not a top 20. He just got a contract with the Raiders,
and I said it was a win. I said it was a win, Brandon.
He basically did. Okay.
Winners and losers. The Chicago Bears, Brandon. I'm going to give them the win, even though it looks like they overpaid for a linebacker. They've been active. Ooh. The Chicago Bears came into today, according to ESPN NFL analyst Field Yates, the Chicago Bears had by far the most cap space entering free agency, $72 million in cap space going into this. So they've got money to spend. They needed defensive identity, all the things that we've talked about for them. And so over the course of the day, they signed TJ Edwards, the former linebacker for the Philadelphia Eagles, Tremaine Edmonds, former linebacker for the Buffalo Bills and Pro Bowler, which just having those two names in the same linebacker room, completely unfair. Completely unfair to announcers, completely unfair to commentators. This is Josh McDaniels and Mike McDaniel taking a job coaching in the same year. Wholly unfair.
Why'd you do that?
Because it's unfair. And I think they should have thought about us before they made this move. They gave Tremaine Edmonds a 4-year, $72 million contract that includes $50 million guaranteed, according to Adam Schefter. So go off, by the way, on that one. I loved this stipulation from ESPN. It's the largest 4-year contract for an inside linebacker in the NFL. That's Brandon, that's what you always talk about. That's like an ESPN baseball stat. Yes.
I'm trying. It didn't work. I tried the damn soundboard to do the clapping and it didn't work.
Oh, so. I thought you were trying to nay for a podcast audience.
The nay. Keep talking.
And so looking at this again, this to me felt spiritually like the Christian Kirk signing in Jacksonville last year, where Christian Kirk ended up being a very productive player for them, despite being probably the third best receiver on the Cardinals the year before. Everyone looked at that contract in free agency and said it felt like an overpay. It sort of obscured the rest of the wide receiver market for that year. And in this offseason, where we're going to talk about the inside linebacker market, where Levante David's still on the market right now, as the Buffalo Bills, by the way, do clear some cap space, restructuring some deals over there. So one to keep an eye out for who's going to line up next to Matt Milano next. But you look around to the rest of the linebacker market and there weren't deals going out like this. This feels like, hey, we've got the money to spend. We let Roquan Smith left last year. All the guys that they let as far as the defensive identity, we've got to start to reestablish this, and then probably, I'd imagine, supplement still in the draft. I still think trading back up to get in range of some of those top defensive players is going to be an option as they go younger there. But Tremaine Edmunds is a hammer. Like, when you look at that Buffalo defense, I think he's one of those linebackers. We talked about this with Patrick Queen and the Ravens a lot. When you brought Roquan Smith over, it allowed you to get the best version of Patrick Queen because Roquan could cover up so much. I think that same thing was sort of true with Tremaine Edmunds next to Matt Milano with all that he could do as a linebacker. And so I have questions about how this may look in Chicago, because I don't think between him and TJ Edwards, you necessarily have one guy who's incredibly dynamic. TJ played his best ball this last year. I loved him coming out of Wisconsin. He lost some weight. He was a little more mobile. He's still a real downhill thumper. But this, I think, qualifies as an overpay. Happy for the guy. Love everyone getting all their money, but I'm just saying relative to production, this seems like they overpaid because they have to at this point, because that's the stage of program building they're in.
Yeah, you mentioned Roquan Smith. I'm hoping he's not looking at this deal and thinking lesser of himself or his deal with the Ravens, because as much as this free agency stuff, like, everyone wants to be comparative because that's the market and that's the game that we're in. It's impossible to apples to apples all the variables that lead to these contracts. The Chicago Bears are just like Ryan Poles and them are just working with bigger pockets. Well,
and I would say this too, like Roquan Smith paid more than him in every metric, makes more average per year, more total value on the contract, more total guaranteed money. Like, when you line it up, in terms of total money, Tremaine Edmunds is fourth in the NFL. In terms of average annual value, he is fourth among off-ball linebackers, middle linebackers, I should say, in the NFL. Yeah. In terms of total guaranteed money, he is fourth. Like, he didn't reset the market with this contract, even though they've got that 4-year stipulation. Fully guaranteed money, he's third, so he moves up a little bit there over Shaq Leonard with the Colts, but is still behind C.J. Mosley and Roquan Smith. However you slice it, it wasn't a market center, but it was more than most people look at and say this player's worth.
Yeah, but I'm thinking about Roquan Smith and the type of football player he is. He's looking at the top 5, and I think he's looking at Fred Warner like he should be getting that type of money versus Tremaine Edmunds. But the Bears are excited, as they should be, and
Yeah, I would say Roquan and Fred Warner are in a league of their own as far as the best off-ball linebackers in the NFL right now. So that's signed, sealed, delivered, and secured. But when you look at the rest of the Bears' day, also they went out and signed former Titans offensive guard Nate Davis to help shore up that offensive line. Yes. Going to be interesting to see how they move around Tevin Jenkins, who was one of their homegrown guys, the draft pick out of Oklahoma State, who's dealt with some injury but started playing pretty well at right guard. And so going to have to shuffle the deck some there, but the Bears are at least going out and being active, right? They're already coming off the great trades that they made. The decision to go and get DJ Moore also looking better and better as the first day of free agency came and went without any real mention of the wide receiver class that we've talked about isn't the strongest in the world. So Ryan Poles can definitely feel good about the way that he has played this so far, even if that involves a bit of an overpay, because we saw last year that can still work out for you if you're Jacksonville, because the quarterback is ultimately going to be the ceiling decider here. Brandon, the Miami Dolphins right now may be the overall winners of this thing. Obviously, the Jalen Ramsey trade is going to be the one that decides that the most. But when we talk about valued off-ball linebacker, they agreed to a 2-year deal with former Titans linebacker David Long Jr., the former West Virginia linebacker. 2 years, $11 million. bargain bin stuff for a guy who finished last year injured and on IR with a hamstring injury, but played really well before that, is a bit undersized, but can come downhill and still stick you. And so for that defense and Vic Fangio coming over, all the reasons that we mentioned, and with that D-line in front of him, he's going to have a better time. He's coming from a place in the Tennessee where you had Jeffrey Simmons, you had one of the great four-man rushes in the NFL. Going down to Miami, you've still got a ton of guys in front of you that are going to absolutely help your cause as a linebacker. So this is another one. Prudent signing that feels really good, as they also brought Mike White in, the former Jets quarterback, the end of the White Mike era in New York. Yes. We hardly knew ye. So banner day and banner week so far for the New York Jets.
That is the Marciano cherry on top. Is that how you say that?
We'll say cherry? That, yeah.
Okay, yeah. That's the cherry on top. Mike White was. But yeah, like I think as much as like pass rushers are plug and play, I feel like another year for Bradley Chubb with a new defense completely, like, and everyone kind of, you know, playing to each other's strengths a whole off season together. I feel like he's going to earn the money that was given to him. To not earn it, he's already earned it. That's why he got the money. But you know what I mean? I think he's going to have another breakout season with that.
Yeah,
defense.
Well, and I mean, you look at him. Jalen Phillips was probably under talked about for how impactful he was last year. Christian Wilkins was not. He deservedly got talked about as much as he did because he was phenomenal and was a tackle for loss monster. And so, yes, all of those pieces fitting together with one of the best coordinators really has it feel like the Dolphins are putting themselves in great position to, again, if Tua's back healthy and consistently under center for them this season, and you get some of what you got for the moments he was on the field last year, this is a team that is absolutely in contention to challenge for the AFC East this year, and absolutely a playoff team coming out of that division.
But what a backup.
What a backup indeed, man. White Mike. I mean,
so good.
Where
White comma Mike, by the way.
Where were you? Just remember this: White Mike is already in the Hall of Fame. You go back to 2021 when he started for Zach Wilson and threw for 405 yards and 3 touchdowns, upsetting the Bengals, set a record for most completions, 37, by a player in his first start, and his jersey and the game ball were displayed the following week in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. So that is one game Hall of Famer White Mike to you, Miami Dolphins fans. To let him go within the division too, we got the potential for a revenge game next year, and folks, strap in if that becomes the case.
Bro, Western Michigan, Western Kentucky's finest. Like I'm just very, 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 very proud of my fellow Kentuckian.
White Mike showing out, putting Kentucky on the map. Brandon, last one here from the team side of things. The Philadelphia Eagles got to be a loser so far when you look at what they've lost. Now, both coordinators leaving to take head coaching jobs offensively and defensively. And on day one of free agency, 3 guys lost so far up front. Jordan Hargrave, I almost called him Vernon Hargrave. Dear God. Javon Hargrave, dear God. Okay. Javon Hargrave lost to free agency. TJ Edwards, who we already mentioned, free agency, gone to the Bears. And then Marcus Epps, their safety, signed with the Las Vegas Raiders in free agency. He had the most snaps on defense played by any Eagles player last season. And according to ESPN Stats and Info, 8 of Philly's top 9 players by total defensive snaps last season have either left, are current free agents, or have received permission to seek a trade, referencing cornerback Darius Slay, whose representation, I believe, is Drew Rosenhaus, asked last week permission to seek a trade there. So they've still got Robert Quinn, Fletcher Cox, and Ndamukong Suh, Kaiser White, their linebacker, CJ Gardner-Johnson, James Bradbury, Isaac Seumalo, Miles Sanders, and Boston Scott, all up in free agency. And so it's just a lot of change all at once, Brandon, for this team that I'd imagine some of these decisions are being made with the looming Jalen Hurts contract in mind.
I don't know, Mike. I feel like that team at this point is probably comfortable with letting everyone go and restarting and making sure the quarterback is paid and start building the team over again. Like, obviously, we expect the Chiefs to be back in that game again soon because, you know, plug and play. Patrick Mahomes is there. You guys are good. But this Eagles team can clearly rebuild. Like the GMs, the decision makers in the front office, the coaches, like it seems like everyone in that franchise knows what they're doing.
Definitely does, and Howie Roseman deserves a ton of credit for how he's built this team, how he built them from the 2017 Super Bowl back to a team that made it again last year. We've gone over all that stuff, but I just imagine part of it's still got to be unnerving. That was a defense that had 70 sacks in the regular season last year, and now you're going to upset a lot of that. Kaiser White, I thought, afforded them the ability to do a lot of things with his speed on the second level. We've talked about their corner tandem, CJ Gardner-Johnson coming over in that trade and what he did for the secondary down the backstretch of the year. So all important names in this defense, even if you've got young guys that you think are going to be able to work their way up, like Jordan Davis, Nakobe Dean, both of those guys, the Georgia players and draft picks from last year, guys that are expected to help assume those roles and make up for some of what's lost. But it's just a lot of change all at once for one of the teams that was in the Super Bowl versus the Kansas City Chiefs, who are going to be a part of our last winner or loser, Brandon, and that is big men. Big men, the winners of the first day of legal tampering, man. Thick boys getting that song on TikTok, the "It's Cuffin' Season." Be feeling, I need a big boy. I need a big boy. Mike, that Sia song?
You just told me you made that song up.
I didn't say I made that. No, I made up a dirty version that I sang for you before the show. That Cuffin' Season song is an SCA song, or however you pronounce her name. I'm so fucking old. But it was a parody song that she did, I think, on Saturday Night Live that went super viral on TikTok.
Oh.
Anyway.
That was the Kelsey episode.
Yes. No, different episode. Entirely different episode.
Okay, I'm sorry. I thought you meant Ballerina. Sorry.
Oh, no. But anyway, big men showed up and showed out. Listen to the paydays that went out to the girth in this class. Late last night, the Seahawks agreed to terms with former Broncos defensive tackle Draymond Jones. 3 years, $51.53 million, and $23.5 million due in year one, $35 million over 2 years. Go get that money. Great signing for the Seahawks, by the way. As many pointed out, one of the bigger splash free agent signings we've seen them make in quite some time. The Denver Broncos signed our boy Mike McGlinchey to a 5-year, $87.5 million deal with $50 million guaranteed. Ooh. By the way, for those keeping score at home, let me read you the NFL second contracts for the 2015 Notre Dame offensive line. This is the starting five for that group. Ronnie Stanley at left tackle, Quentin Nelson at left guard, Nick Martin at center, Mike McGlinchey at right tackle. Our boy Steve Elmer, who's off working in Washington somewhere, was at right guard. The second contracts for that offensive line. Ronnie Stanley, 5 years, $98.75 million with $64 million guaranteed. Quentin Nelson, 4 years, $80 million with $60 guaranteed. Nick Martin, 3 years, $33 million and $18 guaranteed. And Mike McGlinchey, 5, $87.5 and $50. That right there, my friends, is the Harry Heastand effect. That's a bad group of motherfuckers who I will never pay for drinks around again.
Whew. Yeah. Rightfully so, Mike. And it's just, I'm lost for words. I wanted to say something snarky as a defensive lineman and say that they're ranked by how much they're paid, but it's Notre Dame at the end of the day.
Yeah. Joe Schmidt, former Notre Dame linebacker, did tweet about being on the other side of that, and he said going up against these guys in practice made playing other teams seem like it was JV. Them and Coach Eastand were different.
Before Heaston even got there with Zach Martin, for me, he was one of the early reasons I was like, yeah, I don't know if I'm going to make it to the NFL if I have to compete against him. I think it was like a tug of war thing or some other like one-on-one lineman drill. And I was like, whew, this guy.
Yeah.
Like actually moving a truck.
They're all built different all-stars. Like I saw McGlinchey and Q working out when I went back to one of the first times after I was starting to lose the playing weight. And I walked in the middle of a workout. They're both as like pumped up as you can possibly get. And it was hilarious to think that at one point I technically played the same position as them. So congratulations to Mike McGlinchey completing the final Infinity Stone in the gauntlet that was the 2015 ND offensive line. You also had, as we mentioned, the 49ers signing Eagles D tackle Javon Hargrave to a 4-year, $84 million deal with $40 million guaranteed. I think he had the third most sacks of an interior or of a D tackle in the last 2 years, with something like 18 and a half. Guy's been a mutant. And think about now that 49ers defensive line. Already the number one run defense in the NFL last year. Now adds Javon Hargrave, who shows up there certainly, but can also harass the passer in a way they've been waiting for Javon Kinlaw to take the next step to do. Scary hours for that unit. Again, not going to be the number one guy on anybody's board as far as who they got to block up there as long as Nick Bosa still lives in town. Incredible, make a strength even greater signing that allows them to go out and do things like sign Sam Darnold as one of the backup quarterbacks there. Man, Kyle Shanahan's got a type. He's a fixer. He's a fixer, man. That's just what this guy wants to do.
It's like Harrison Ford in Shrinking.
Yes.
Like he just wants to get in there. Like honestly, like the mono may have messed him up, but I still feel like Sam Darnold is fixable.
That's because
I've seen too many good things.
We all remember the gifts 100%. And that's what he does too. He remembers the gifts and he goes, no, baby girl, I can fix you. I can go ahead and get this all patched up. So, we'll see. Again, I was like the white lady meme where I was like, it is Kyle Shanahan. We've seen him do plenty with less. If anyone can do it, it's Kyle. I wouldn't bet on it, but I wouldn't be surprised. If we had one random Sam game. That's all I'm saying.
I'm saying that it's deeper than that, Mike. He's going to turn Sam Darnold into an NFL coach, where other than that, he may have been selling cars somewhere,
Love to see that for him. Speaking of someone who's not ready to go pro in something other than sports, the Eagles announced that center Jason Kelce is returning for another season. Jason made that announcement on his Twitter, on the New Heights Twitter feed, their podcast. Awesome to see for him. I think this is going to be year 13. We talked about all the turnover on the defensive side for them. Having this kind of stalwart back on the offensive line is massive for them, and this way that this team wants to keep building with Jalen Hurts back there at quarterback still. So great news for Jason. Awesome to see one of the great ambassadors for the sport still in the center of that offense. This is where it gets interesting, Brandon. So we had the Bills sign for former Cowboys offensive lineman Connor McGovern, which is great. 3 years, $23 million. The Falcons gave their guard Chris Lindstrom a 5-year, $105 million extension, which was one of the best guards in the NFL last year. Played like an all-pro, deserved that extension. Atlanta, as they're getting ready to build their new core, awesome guy to have around there. One of the only times I'm going to say nice things about a former Boston College Golden Eagle, but Chris was one of my favorite players to watch coming out of school. He's kept that up in the NFL. This was a wild one and says more about where free agency is going to go. The Chiefs signed former Jaguars offensive lineman Juwan Taylor to a 4-year, $80 million deal with $60 million guaranteed. That one shocked a lot of people and signifies that Orlando Brown's probably on his way out. Like, he's the number one free agent on ESPN.com's list. He's a young player who wants big time money, and the Chiefs appear content to let him go on here. Juwan Taylor hasn't missed a game since he was drafted in 2019. Hasn't always been great, but in the last he's 25 years old. He's a really toolsy player. He's got an elite skill set. And I saw Brandon Thorne, who's a great offensive line expert on Twitter. The Trench Warfare Substack is an awesome read for people that are into big boy play. And he pointed out, and this is something I do not feel like we talk about nearly enough for all players. We've started to introduce it more with quarterbacks, but this idea that understanding your staff and your personnel as a team matters a lot. And for a player like this, because you've got Andy Reid, because you've got Andy Heck, their offensive line coach, and because you've got Patrick Mahomes and the rest of this group, as Brandon points out, Joe Thuney at left guard next to you matters. Like, the guy immediately to your left or right in an offensive line and their ability to help you and make you more comfortable and even out and smooth out some of those issues, especially a player as technically sound as Joe Thuney. All of that stuff works in conjunction. And so this is the Chiefs not only betting on the talent of the player, but also betting on the infrastructure and the ability they have to develop this position in particular. That's a reason why they can do this and feel good about it in a way that I think very few other teams can.
Yeah, Mike, I can't imagine being a free agent and getting signed by the Super Bowl, the reigning Super Bowl champs. Like, you just feel like you're in a perfect place to succeed, not because you're going to run it back, but these guys clearly know what they're doing. And I know I've been saying that about other teams, but like when it comes to the Chiefs, like being under Andy Reid is nice. And I guess Matt Nagy, he must have did something right last year to get this offensive coordinator position this year.
Apparently, man. So he's got to be smiling from ear to ear, as is Juwan Taylor, because now he's rich and he gets to play for the team that's probably going to end up back in the Super Bowl because Patrick Mahomes is a god king and the rest of this organization is incredibly roll one. That's just the beginning of free agency. We'll wait and see if Aaron Rodgers decides to do anything. If anything else moves, Laramie Tunsil lurking in the potential trade market is something people think about. Miami Dolphins should be Ring of Honor member Laramie Tunsil because the trade haul they got for him ended up netting them the vast majority of these players, including that third round pick that went for Jalen Ramsey, came from the Laramie Tunsil trade. So that team is the house that Laramie Tunsil built. We'll see if there's any movement for him out of Houston. We are going to take a quick break though, and when we come back, we're going to talk to our friend Nicole Auerbach about the men's and women's March Madness coming up this week. All right, very excited to welcome back in our great friend Nicole Auerbach. You can check her out, senior writer over at The Athletic, covering not only college football, as we've always talked to Nicole about, but a ton of college basketball. Nicole, it's one of my favorite parts of every year is watching you in the offseason transition to one of the most dedicated college basketball fans on my timeline. So how has the college basketball season treated you? It seems like it's been a ton of fun.
Yeah, it has. These years are fun because there's been a revolving door at that top spot in the rankings all year. So it feels like it's going to be one of those tournaments where things could get really chaotic. And as you know, one of my great joys in my career is finding viral fans and viral moments in sports. I have found someone that we can all get behind before the tournament even begins. VCU has a player named David Shriver. I wrote a story about him for The Athletic. He is kind of this like burly mountain man type. He's got a mustache. The hair is like below shoulder length, and he just shoots threes. They call him Freebird, a play on Freebird. And his story is awesome. He started playing D2 in his hometown in West Virginia, went to Hartford, and then when they were dipping down to Division III, transferred to VCU. So that is one of my great joys, delivering you someone that you personally and probably a lot of your listeners would actually love as we get going this week.
The Venn diagram of things this young man represents that I love, references to obviously great rock music, incredible hair and facial hair combinations, and a Connecticut tie, all checks all the boxes here. So very excited to follow Freebird throughout the tournament now. And what a great way to kick this off. You mentioned VCU going to be one of the hopefuls that we look at. Obviously, conference championship weekend was big for them getting in. But you mentioned the revolving door of one seeds also that has made the churn for this year fun. We've seen Purdue, Houston, Alabama, obviously going all the way back to North Carolina. A lot of different teams occupy that spot. For the tournament, the 4-1 seeds ended up being Houston, Alabama, Kansas, and why did I already just blank and miss one on here?
You're forgetting Purdue?
Purdue, Jesus, there we go. It's been a whirlwind couple of days. That being said, looking at that, Alabama, the number one overall seed in the tournament. Any issues, any surprises there and how that shook out, especially with Bama getting that top overall spot?
Not based on the way that Kansas finished the Big 12 tournament and the regular season. I think that those, basically by the time we woke up on Sunday, most of the bracketologists had put Alabama in there as the number one overall seed. But it is pretty unlikely or unusual, I'll say, that is up in the air, that could change on the last day of the season. And it did with Alabama and what they went through in the SEC tournament. One thing that was pretty shocking, like the first big surprise of the bracket reveal, was Houston as the second overall seed ahead of Kansas. Kansas has a lot more quad one wins. So that was an interesting justification. It was sort of about metrics and combining quad one and quad two records to justify that for Houston, but the committee just clearly liked Houston, trusts Houston more. And Kansas got blown out by Texas twice in the last week of the season. So that didn't help. And then Purdue being on that one line, that felt right as well as soon as UCLA lost over the weekend because of the run that they had through the Big Ten tournament. They had a lull towards the end of the regular season, but I do think that they did enough, and the Big Ten did send a lot of teams to the tournament. It doesn't have a ton of high seeds, but they did have the body of work, I think, to get them that last number 1 seed. So overall, I didn't have any issue with it. I did have a little bit of the issue with Houston and Kansas in the order, but both of them also have their own challenges in their parts of the bracket. So I think that, ultimately a lot of this stuff will work itself out by the way that these things play out on the court. But like Houston potentially having to play Auburn in Birmingham does not feel all that fair. And then Kansas, I think, has the toughest region. Also doesn't feel all that fair. But again, we look at these things when they're kind of chalky and it seems easier or harder. And this stuff always ends up changing as soon as we get upsets.
Yeah, I think about the person who had the biggest problem with Kansas is probably Bill Walton. For anyone that watched the Pac-12 championship game, Bill Walton took the time to remind everyone that he believes Kansas has not once been punished for any loss that they've had during the course of this season. So the Big 12 championship not going to help in any argument against him. But you mentioned it. Do you think Kansas, as far as the 1 seed, has the toughest path to get to the Final Four of any of these teams right now?
I do, just because as they were unveiling the different regions, it just feels really, really difficult. And I really want to pick them to go to the Final Four, because in a year that has had so much turmoil, despite the losses to Texas late, I just feel like they could be inevitable. It could just be one of those years, and they're trying to do go back to back since the first time since Florida did it. But yeah, I mean, let's just look at their region. So UCLA, we were just talking about them. Really good team, really hard. That's a Mick Cronin team. They just are totally Mick Cronin and that personality. They play hard. You've got Gonzaga as the 3, and this is a team that I think a lot of people wrote off earlier in the year because they did lose some games we're not used to seeing. They're not on that top seed line, but they've been playing really, really well over the back third of the season, but especially in this last month heading into the tournament. So they're the 3, and then who is the 4? UConn is the 4 in this region, and that's a really good UConn team. Really high ceiling, might be the best team or the furthest team from the Big East. So that's a really tough region to me when I look at that, and also the idea that, you could get Illinois in the second game. That's a team that also has a high ceiling. They've been really inconsistent, but those are some good teams that they're going to have to go through. I've seen a lot of people thinking Gonzaga can get to meet Kansas there in the Elite 8. That would be an awesome matchup. I also think if it's UCLA, that would be awesome. So you have these blue bloods in college basketball. I would consider Gonzaga one of them as well. They're all in Kansas's region. So it may end up working out that the way that they fell on that number 1 seed line could make this way more difficult for the Jayhawks to win.
I think it's a great point. The Zags, one of the best offenses in college basketball, and UConn, the Ken Pom darlings. I think they're top 5 in the Ken Pom rankings. So everyone's circling that one, which as a former Connecticut resident, water wet, somehow UConn always finding their way into these conversations. Speaking of water being wet, I wanted to migrate over to the East region where Purdue sits as the 1 seed. Talk to me about the Duke Blue Devils and where they sit in the midst of all this. This has been a team that has struggled with injury, but as we saw, when their core and their starting group is all on the floor together, they've been a really hard opponent to reckon with. They won the ACC championship. So how much does the recency bias of how well they're playing lately affect their tournament prospects?
It does. We all know, because we've heard it a million times, that it doesn't affect their seeding or making the tournament, right? That the games in November count just as much for the ones at the end. But as you look at a bracket and you're trying to figure this out, I mean, Duke absolutely figured things out at the end of the season. It's been a really remarkable year for John Shire. It's so hard to be the guy after the guy, and so much of how much they got better and developed and gelled is obviously a credit to him. So I think you could take a lot out of that ACC tournament run. We've also seen, even last year, people came into the tournament saying the ACC was down. They didn't send that many teams to the tournament. And then you get all these teams in the Sweet 16 and the Elite 8. So this is a league that tends to play well this time of year. Even though John Shire's never been the head coach in this situation, this is a program that's been there, knows it, and he's played in it and coached in it a million times. So I think that's really interesting. That game against Oral Roberts in the first round might be the best game of the opening weekend. As you remember, and I really should have looked this up, how to say it right. Max is it Abmas? He was the player who sparked their upset 2-3 years ago. He's still there. He's still at Oral Roberts. This is a team that can really shoot the ball. This is what we love when you're looking for a mid-major potential Cinderella. It's also a 5-12 game, which we know that there's usually a 12-5 upset somewhere on the bracket, at least one. So I think that'll be a really fun one, but I actually kind of hate it for Oral Roberts that they drew like a 5 seed that's really playing well, that if they had played that well all season long would not be a 5 seed. So yeah, I'm pretty in on Duke. I do think that they have the pieces and they really are clicking at the right time. That bracket, that part of the bracket's really interesting because that's Purdue's region. So we were talking about it earlier. They were the 4th and final number 1 seed. When you look at the seed totals and they were trying to figure out, the imbalances in the regions, like it's not the hardest part of the bracket, but you have Duke that's playing really well. And then I'm not sure there's a hotter team in the country than Marquette. So I think Marquette has a really good chance to come out of that region and get to the Final Four.
I was just going to ask about that. Marquette sitting at the 2 seed there, it seems like a really potent contender, but my God, if you love big man play in that region between Duke and Purdue and that matchup potentially here, you're going to get it in droves. Nicole, you mentioned the 12-5 aspect of this. So much of the tournament boils down to people looking for that next Cinderella team, someone who might be able to upset the apple cart. We know chalk generally tends to prevail, but if you're looking outside of our dear sweet friend Threebird at VCU for another team or two that might have that Cinderella capability, especially when we get into some of the double-digit seeds, who do you kind of have your eye on?
Well, so Threebird and VCU, they are 12, so that's a 12-5 game with St. Mary's, who I also very much like. But if you're looking for potential teams, I mean, VCU as the A10 regular season champs went through the A10 tournament, and again, it's that three-point shooting. He's not the only guy, but who doesn't love a big guy coming off the bench? He's basically like our thick six of college basketball, so that's why we're pulling for him in that 12-5 game. Let's see. Who else do we have here? I would say that you could also look at Utah State, I think, opened as a favorite over Missouri. And again, if you look at some of the metrics and where they rank compared to the Tigers, that could be a compelling one as well. I will also say the College of Charleston, they're at 31 wins on the season. And they've just had, obviously, an incredible run. They are playing San Diego State. That's a 5-12 game. That could be a very popular upset pick because we've heard a lot about Charleston all season long, and it is hard to win 31 games in the season. Let me see. Who else? You know how I love – okay, here's another one that, this frustrated me. So Florida Atlantic, Dusty May, having an incredible season. They are in an 8-9 game, and they draw Memphis, who is playing – phenomenally well. I hate that. I hate that so much. And again, Oral Roberts drawing Duke. I want to pick these teams because I love the mid-majors, but those are tough matchups because they're playing teams, that are really, really good right now. So those would be the ones that I would start looking at. I also think if you really like the story, go look up Kennesaw State. They're in the tournament for the first time, and it's been a remarkable turnaround over just a couple of years. They won one game 4 years ago. They're going to be at my site. I'm going to be in Greensboro, North Carolina. So there is a lot of great stories, even if that team doesn't end up pulling off the upset. But we've seen a lot of we've seen a couple 15s in recent years. But I would say always at least 1-12-5 on your bracket, and then we've also seen a number of 14 over 3s. There was a stretch where with Mercer over Duke, UAB, and then Stephen F. Austin over West Virginia, I had 3 in a row. And it's the things that you look for when you're looking at these rosters just as the cheat sheet. So again, don't listen to my advice. Furman's an interesting one as well. They got UVA in the first round. There are certain mid-major programs that have been to the tournament before, so this isn't going to blind them. They will not be shocked at the stage and the bright lights. You look for teams that have great guard play, veteran players, core players that have played together for multiple years, which is a little harder to find in the transfer portal era, but you can find it on these mid-major teams. And then just teams that have been really consistent in the regular season. So a lot of these teams were teams that won their league in the regular season and then won the tournament. But sometimes, you can find things there. So look, veteran players, veteran guards, like this is where I go. And then this is a tangent, but like Purdue, I just saw them play all last weekend, the Big Ten tournament. They have young guards and they really struggle with the press. And it's like, it doesn't matter who pressed them, Rutgers in particular. And Rutgers has been a real challenge for Purdue the last couple of years. But like that deeply concerns me because I've watched Shabazz Napier and Ryan Boatwright take a UConn team that was not the best team in the country all the way to a national championship because they had two great guards. And if you don't have that, it becomes really, really hard because so much of this is about style and matchups and different looks that you're going to see defensively. So that gives me great pause about Purdue is the fact that they're young, they've been inconsistent at times, but also just the press and the late game situations are going to be hard for them. They play through a 7-4 center, which is different than everybody else, but you have to be able to get the ball to him. So that was a tangent because that's the opposite of what you're going to be looking at if you're looking for rosters that can pull off a couple of upsets or even just one in the first round.
And that really is, I think, the most fun part of the tournament for a lot of people. Like, I'd contend, and I'd be curious for you as someone who goes out to the sites and sees this in a lot of different way, that opening weekend of March Madness, I think, is one of the best, if not the best, sports watching weekend of the year.
Yes. Oh, it absolutely is. I actually think, like, conference tournament week is way up there, too, because you have so many games, and you could essentially, if you time it correct, you probably could on the West Coast, like every waking hour, you could be watching basketball all throughout the week. But no, I mean, the first 4 days of the tournament are absolutely the best. I will say I miss the days before you had like a million different screens. As I say this, like phone is here, iPad is here. I miss the days where you like had to go to a sports bar to have multiple games on, or like, kind of like pull a TV out to put next to the other one because you couldn't do picture in picture, or you had to like run somewhere because you couldn't just pull it up on your phone if there was a crazy finish happening. Like I kind of miss that where you were like, it was more of an event. Whereas, again, now I will just have 3 different screens up while I'm at a site and be able to watch everything. But I do love this time of year. And also, it is such a crapshoot as a reporter because you get assigned a site. And you don't know if your site is going to be where the big story is. Like I was saying, I was at Mercer Duke, but I didn't know that was going to be the big upset. I actually did pick it in my bracket that year. They had like 7 seniors on their team. But you don't know. I've been at sites where it's like the 1 seeds and they just win and it's kind of boring. And then UMBC beats Virginia elsewhere and you're just like staring at the TV being like, like I've got Syracuse in the zone. They're the Cinderella out of my sight. So it is a frustrating experience because you just never know. But it is awesome. There is no better, like one of my favorite things as a sports reporter is going in the locker room of the team that pulled off an upset and finding the story, figuring out who the interesting players, who's got a crazy backstory, how did they do this, what is this coach's story? That is the absolute best. It's chills every time, and we've talked about this a lot. I think relative overall to college basketball, it is where you get to build a lot of the mystique around. Even the players that'll end up being lottery picks or NBA guys, you get to build your legacy in March because you're the biggest show in town. It is our opportunity to meet and really hone in on so many of those teams. And so Nicole is the one you're going to be one of the following if you want to learn as much as humanly possible about these teams along the way. Now, Nicole, before we touch on the women's bracket a little bit, have you already mapped out a Final Four that you've picked? Have you gone through a bracket and done the work yet? I have. I used to, when I worked at USA Today, they used to make me do the bracket like within a half hour on Selection Sunday and then put it up on the website. So I was like, okay, I feel very locked into this. And it depended on like my mood that day if I would pick a bunch of upsets or not, right? Like, because I want it to be interesting, but not too bad where it would like fall apart immediately. So this was my first look bracket. I've got Alabama, Marquette, Indiana, and Kansas. But like, I also really like Houston, so I might reconsider them coming out of that part of the bracket. But then it'd be a bunch of 1 seeds and Marquette. So I don't know. I think I have Kansas going all the way through and winning this thing. assuming Bill Self is healthy enough and can be back there on the sidelines, I think he's done an incredible job with this particular team. He always plays into the strengths of the individual roster he has. And Jalen Wilson is really, really good. I think he can carry them. So I think it's them. But, Alabama has been playing extremely well coming out of the SEC tournament. Marquette, again, I think is one of the hottest teams in the country, and just Shaka Smart and that marriage to Marquette has been perfect. He's real. They're just really fun to watch offensively as well. And then again, I think Indiana will go the furthest out of all the Big Ten teams. So I don't know if I trust them to go this far, but Trace Jackson Davis, I think, is actually the best player in the country. He's not going to win the National Player of the Year awards, but he is phenomenal. And having seen him up close the last few days, I feel like Indiana's the team that I'm going to trust too much, and they will not go as far as I think they will do. But that's the one, I've come to terms with that. That's going to be the team that I will go a round or two too far with.
There we go. Nicole riding with the Hoosiers, the home field apparel company, somewhere shouting with great joy as they release yet another Fire Bomber jacket. It's an interesting time for college basketball overall with a lot of the teams you mentioned. Certainly Indiana, Blue Blood program, a lot of these ones, but we are kind of in an era where we're turning over so many of the big coaching names that have been a part of the sport for such a long time. Alabama is the number 1 overall seed in the tournament. That's an insane thing to comprehend, and quite honestly feels unfair given what they've enjoyed for football over the last couple of decades, without certainly getting into how complicated they are going to be to discuss as a team, considering everything that's gone on with Brandon Miller and that squad. North Carolina said no to the NIT. It's a wild, wild time right now. But Nicole, I did want to also ask you, because as over on SiriusXM, you also were hosting and a part of the conversation around the bracket reveal for the NCAA women's bracket. And in that one, I do think we've got a very interesting comp to our world of college football. The 1 seeds there, the Stanford Cardinal, no surprise, been one of the dominant forces in college basketball for a while. Indiana also repping hard over on the women's side of the bracket as well. Virginia Tech and defending national champion South Carolina. They, to me, have become the Georgia football to what was UConn's Alabama for so long. Dawn Staley, is it fair to say now they have become the flagship program of women's college hoops, and everyone else is trying to get in their orbit?
Yes. I think fairly we all started using the word dynasty after they won last spring, and that feels right. They are the standard bearers. And again, I know Gino Auriemma is still at UConn. They're still UConn. They're still a 2 seed, right? There was actually, depending on the injuries and saying Easy Fudd missed a lot of the season, maybe they could have had a case for a 1 seed. Their streak of 14 straight Final Fours still intact. They're going for number 15. They're still around, but Dawn is the face of the sport, and her players are the ones that we look to, and we are watching them chase perfection this season, right? This is where UConn used to be. They're going for back-to-back national championships. And it's funny, they sent out, all the National Player of the Year candidates, the schools send stuff to the reporters as part of their campaigns. And South Carolina's for Aaliyah Boston this year was a puzzle. And it was she's the piece that, fits this team together. If you believe that South Carolina is the best team in the country, she's the missing piece, right? She's the important piece. And that's a really good case to make. And again, I don't think it's going to work. Caitlin Clark, deservedly so, should be the National Player of the Year. But that's how South Carolina is this season. They're unbeaten. I don't know that they are unbeatable, but it's definitely one of the situations on the women's side where it's South Carolina or the field. And I think I'm taking South Carolina in that case, because Dawn just gets that team up for every game whenever they play. And they're built a little bit differently than they were last year, right? But I think that they are certainly capable of running through this tournament. There's also for anyone who's listening who wants to watch this tournament, there is a tweak this year. There's going to be 2 super regionals. So 2 parts of the bracket will be decided in Greenville, South Carolina, and then 2 parts in Seattle. So that second weekend, you'll actually have 2 different regions have their Sweet 16 and Elite 8 games. And it's not like they will be playing each other, but they will determine and cut down the nets or whatever at 2 different sites. So South Carolina will have 2 home games, and then they will have games in Greenville, South Carolina. So they should be in Dallas with the Final Four. Like, we can all pencil it in now because their fans are crazy and they will show up there. So again, I think I would go with them versus the field. Although the parity in the women's game really has led to a number of different contenders. I think you could have 2 Big Ten teams make it to the Final Four even. I do think, UConn healthy can get there. It's a lot of interesting teams, but it really does feel like it's South Carolina's tournament to lose.
You mentioned 2 Big Ten teams and Caitlin Clark, obviously. Is it hyperbole to say that she is, I think, the surest product of any player walking in? Like, if you're looking for must-see TV during the NCAA tournament from one player, is Caitlin Clark the safest bet between either tournament?
Yes, I would say that and I know that Zach Edey has kind of also broken through, right, and transcended just college basketball diehards. But I think Caitlin Clark is the most recognizable, well-known basketball player in the country this year. And I think it's the way that she plays, and also I think her passing is underrated. Like, she's an incredibly good passer. Which just sets up a lot of really interesting things for Iowa. But yeah, like, who wouldn't want to see someone who can drop 40 or 50 in a game? Maddie Siegrist at Villanova can do that, by the way, as well, if you're looking for another shooter on the women's side. But yeah, I mean, it's the Caitlin Clark show. And what's crazy is, like, when they're playing, Indiana games on the line, everyone knows the ball is going to go to Caitlin Clark and that she can take a logo 3. And you know what? She's still going to do it. She's still going to make it. And so she's been really, really fun to watch. And there was some controversy about that final number 1 seed on the women's side because a lot of projections I saw thought it would be Iowa, but it did go to Stanford. It doesn't really matter because those 2 teams will play it out on the court. Hopefully we get that as an Elite 8 game, but that could be a little chip on their shoulder as well. They also got bounced early last year. So very interested to see. Hopefully we do get a nice little run of the Caitlin Clark show.
Yeah, all aboard that freight train there, especially for me, the Notre Dame Fighting Irish ladies checking in as a 3 seed, although I am not inclined to feel great considering Olivia Miles, Dara Mabry, the injuries that kind of befell that team at the end of the season. But still, I think as we talk about overall college basketball, because the names that we mentioned, right? Gino's still up there. Certainly what Dawn's done, the face of the sport in South Carolina. Tara Vanderveer's a Hall of Famer and a legend at Stanford. But selfishly, to see Neil Ivey, ACC Coach of the Year, and what this program is already after that transition from her to Muffet, pretty remarkable testament to their season, and one that I'm certainly very proud of, even if I don't have the highest hopes right this second.
Yeah, there was an interesting case where everyone was curious to see what their seeding would be, and obviously they were a number 3 seed, but like not knowing what Olivia Miles' health status is and her availability, how close to 100% she'll be, is a big question. But yeah, she's a great example of there is a next generation of coaches coming up, and in the men's side, there's still a vacuum. It feels like you're still waiting to see who's kind of going to take the mantle of the sport. But on the women's side, like, you see them, you see the emerging programs. Virginia Tech rose this year and Utah rose this year. Like, there are a number of places that are really stepping up. And, what Neil Ivey's done has just been awesome. And she's also just really cool. Like, I just want to hang out with her. I think that's what, like, Dawn is the same way, where I'm just like, yeah, you be the face of this sport because you're just so cool. Like, I can see why people want to play for you, but I also love that energy because it just feels closer to like where the players are and where college sports is in 2023. And so I think that's really cool too about some of these emerging voices.
It's been incredible. You're right. The place and the parity that's in the women's game right now, going to make for a really exciting tournament for all of those regions. Nicole, can't thank you enough. Again, everyone, if you're not following Nicole Auerbach heading into the tournaments, if you're not listening to her on Sirius XM radio, checking out the Power Hour whenever you can get it in the podcast world, you're missing out. She's going to have all the best stories for you. If a person has an incredible mustache or is reading something strange in the stands, she is going to find them. So, Nicole, thank you so much. Always appreciate you, friend.
Yep, anytime. Enjoy March.
Brandon Newman, do you know what time it is?
Oh, shit. Yes. Sorry.
That being said, we let the people weigh in. As always, download, subscribe, rate, and review. Leave us a 5-star rating. Let Brandon know what a good job he did. Brandon, let's get to this, that, and the third. 3 quick stories on the way out today. And the first one sucks. Like, there's no way around it. This is a sad story, and it's really only gotten sadder. Reports from ESPN's Tim McMahon and Adrian Wojnarowski that Memphis Grizzlies guard Ja Morant has entered a counseling program in Florida, and there remains no timetable for his return to active play. Brandon, part of me always wonders with news like this, with how sensitive it is, should things like this be getting leaked? Should stuff like this be given to the public? Information about something that's now deeply personal and something this guy's clearly fighting. We've kind of talked about it and around it through the saga of Ja Morant and his, suspension, not suspension from the team. The video that surfaced allegedly of him on Instagram Live with the gun in a club in Denver. All these different things. My hope with this is that for any people that now may have been wooed by other things in this process, right? Trying to come down on Ja Morant for immaturity or anything, the weirdos that released the strip club footage of him just being in a strip club like a consenting adult, which was ridiculous and invasive. I'm hoping this is now the place where people are comfortable to set this aside and say, let's all hope this young man gets help so that he can just be the best version of himself, basketball, personal or otherwise, and then just leave it at that. Now, hopefully this is the stop sign for people as we go forward with this, to leave him alone and let him go and handle his own business.
Yeah, we're all just kind of hoping that Ja gets back to being in a good spot, because clearly he's not right now. I mentioned before on this podcast, my dad coaches football at Crestwood High, was there while Ja was there on the basketball team, and he has a relationship with Ja's dad. And I spent some time with my dad, and he was telling me how he talked to T. Morant, and the whole family's just hoping that this is going to be all a turn for good and a testimony at the end of the day. But yes, I'm 100% with you. Hopefully everyone is done turning this into an internet moment and treating it like a real human moment that it is.
Yeah, it's a reminder we need every once in a while. These are human beings in the middle of all this, and as much as they seem like their lives are different for us because all the money, the fame, and that they get to play a game that we all love, stuff like this is a cold slap of reality. Brandon, let's get to that and go to a much more normal basketball story that is just players hating on other players. In this case, former player Brandon Jennings went on podcast with Gilbert Arenas called Gil's Arena and took shots at a bunch of the current NBA players that have been doing podcasts, the new media crew. He said, I think every NBA player that has a podcast that's talking is karma. If you look at Draymond and how the Warriors are playing, it's just bad. Every player that's talking while they're playing basketball is just karma. Patrick Beverley, all of them, they're having terrible seasons or it's just not going their way. They're just yapping. Like, shut up and just play basketball. He hit him with the shut up and dribble.
That's right. I mean,
Brandon Jennings is our age. You can't be shut up and dribble guy at our age, not for something like this that's so easily disproved. Like this notion that they're losing because they're podcasting. Like, dude, Draymond just won it all again last year while he was podcasting. The Kelsey brothers went to the championship on each side of the NFL, and one of them won it this year. This is the old school version of when people used to say, what are you doing out here doing X, Y, or Z? You need to have your nose in the playbook. It's like my brother in Christ. They're recording these podcasts that release once a week. It takes maybe an hour for them. An hour out of their week is not going to be the difference. I'd hate to break it to you.
There's that argument, Mike, but there's also the argument that there's so many damn podcasts that this is just like,
Draymond's podcast is the number 2 basketball podcast in the world, Brandon. The Kelsey brothers have the actual number 1 podcast, or like one of the top 5 podcasts in the world.
By average, every team that wins a championship should have at least one person podcasting actively on it. Like by now in 2023, I think that's just the law of averages.
I wouldn't be surprised, quite honest. Like Danny Green's got a podcast. The Green Room's been going for a while now. Shout out to my boy Cliff, who used to work over there. I get it. It's happening a lot. It's easier than ever. It's this opportunity for athletes to tell their stories. We can talk about how that's affected the media landscape overall. But what I will not do, because I've always been a proponent, is knock a player for going and securing the next leg of their career while they're still doing the first leg of their career. Like Draymond's got a contract with TNT. The minute he stops, he's going to get to go work for Turner as an analyst and keep doing this podcast. The Kelsey brothers seem to be well set up for life beyond football whenever they want. Jason Kelsey, we've said, part of the reason I'm sure he could mull retirement even more is because, man, you've already made more money than God, and you're going to keep making it doing stuff in and around this whole thing. And so we tell players all the time, the stock line is you're never more valuable to your next employer than while you're with your current employer. While you're a player, everybody wants to be around you. Everybody wants to have you as a part of what they're doing. People in other businesses, people in ones that are tangent to the sport, and people in businesses that have nothing to do with professional athletics. But it's your value, and it's a thing that you can bring to the table that others can't. And so Brandon Jennings, this is just seems like textbook hating, Brandon. And for him to do it on another former NBA player's podcast is hilarious irony.
Well, he hasn't played in a while, but I also think that it's hating. But let's be honest, Mike. Our age, we are the cusp of the get off my lawn, like all of the old traditional takes that like we try to put on boomers. Like very much in our generation, we are of that. So everyone below us, the Gen Zers and all the other generations, we're expecting to be above us. And like, what is woke? You mean being compassionate to someone else? Like, we want that type of rhetoric from them. But our generation, we got people still running around calling people, words that we've already canceled.
Well, I think your point is right that we're on the cusp of starting to get to the lawn that we want other people to get off. I can feel the tension happen every day as things come up.
We have lawns now.
Yes, we have lawns that we would like people to get off now. And that's a big part of the get off my lawn process. So Brandon Jennings got that earlier to us because Brandon Jennings probably has more money than both of us combined and then some. So congratulations to Brandon Jennings on his lawn. I just feel like he's yelling at it in a way that doesn't make sense here. Brandon, let's get to the third, though. Speaking of a sign of the times, you're going to have to walk me through this one because I'm not as familiar with Datpiff, which is essentially, as you described it to me, like I'd heard of it. I'd obviously seen the name used around, but it was something that wasn't a part of my life online. So what is Datpiff and what happened to it?
So Datpiff started probably like 2005, and it was a database to house all the mixtapes that were coming out. And I think at this point in time, it was before streaming really was a thing, but everyone had, first generation iPads and iPod shuffles, and you got the chance to like make a playlist and then put it on a device and never really see the words pop up, but you would hear the songs, right? Like this is around the time that like LimeWire started to take off years after Datpiff. So it was all the mixtapes for hip hop, Lil Wayne, who just went on a mixtape spree for a long time, Rick Ross, Drake, Wiz Khalifa, Mac Miller, like there's Meek Mills, like Kendrick Lamar with Section 80. There's a lot of rappers that started out in the game and only were known by people via Datpiff and mixtapes. So it was like before SoundCloud, and you would literally download an entire mixtape album and have it sitting around and play in the locker rooms and stuff like that. So it was one of those things that artists and rappers would put projects out to see what popped, and then some of these mixtapes were turned into albums, or big parts of the mixtapes were put on albums and things like that. So it showed the success of it, Mike. But the fact that it's gone now, like you used to be able to go back and just listen to some old albums and mixtapes, because like they don't have these on Apple. Like not everyone is Chance the Rapper, who had his first two mixtapes, 10 Day and Acid Rap, that was like double platinum, and they also ranked them, so it was like Yelp a little bit too, on Datpiff, that able to move it to Apple. So people are still listening to old people's music, but now a couple weeks ago people were reporting that they couldn't open the app, iOS or through Android, and now it's come out that the entire thing is gone. So it's a back catalog. It's kind of like complaining about Ash Jeeves no longer being here, but it housed a lot of music that was important to a lot of people. It was very, very easy to download.
Yeah, well, and I think that's also like sign of the times. One, like you said, things from our childhood that are going away, but also like underscores the changes in the music industry. Like you said, streaming's upended so much of this, and in some cases replaced these things. But this was also like early community. Like the reason people are sad is because it was one of the early online communities, and there was a different depth about it back then because you felt like you were, peddling something that was social currency that other people weren't getting to. It was different. Yes. It was yours. It was very like all of that stuff back then, like all of the places like that we used to rip music from. It all just felt a little bit more intimate back then in a way that now is so wholesale. Like everything about the music industry feels more or less like it's been turned into a Whole Foods now.
Right. And it's not like it was like just like a bunch of no-name people. Like I'm looking at the top 10 or top 5 downloaded albums from Datpiff, and they're all like Wiz Khalifa, Lil Wayne, Big Sean. Like these are reputable people, but like that So Far Gone mixtape that Drake put out with Best I Ever Had on it, like that thing was it's been sold as an album since because it was so important. Hell, A$AP Rocky, Rihanna's the father of Rihanna's children, like got hot on Datpiff. Like without Datpiff, a lot of these artists wouldn't exist, and SoundCloud and all those things wouldn't be around. So it is obviously a rap because all these people have their own lawns to yell at people to get off at this point in time. Like, hell, Lil Wayne said the other day that he hasn't had fast food in over 40 years because he's had a private chef since he was 16 years old. And I want to call BS, but like, why would he lie?
Right.
So anyways, these are old people. Anyway, and Mac Miller got really popular from Datpiff too. So yes, this is all done. LimeWire doesn't exist anymore. It's just obviously Datpiff had to die too.
You hate to see it. We will miss it. We hardly knew ye. Thankfully, this podcast isn't going anywhere. So make sure you download, subscribe, rate, and review to keep it that way. We don't want to end up being one of the things forgotten by the sands of time. We want to stick around. Also, make sure you check us out, the DraftKings YouTube channel. Go subscribe to the YouTube channel. It's then very easy to find on your YouTube mobile, on your normal browser YouTube, and then you can go right to the playlist, and the Gojo with Mike Golic Jr. playlist is there. All the episodes, so if you miss any, if you want to see some of your favorite guests come on here, you can go back. They're all going to be there. Thanks so much. We'll talk to you tomorrow. Boom. Money in the bank.